Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Wonderful People Saving the Earth. Their real life stories, what they had to go through, good and bad, and how it changed them. Thanks for being here. I'm Rita Robinson. If you like what you hear today, please click the subscribe button at the end of the video. Today's episode is titled, Some People Say the Only Good Bug is a Dead Bug, but what if they're the only reason we're still here at all? To unravel this question, we're talking with the wonderful Scott Hoffman Black, who holds a master's degree in ecology from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and for the past 22 years has served as executive director of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation out of Portland, Oregon. Under his watch, Xerces has become the go-to and largest invertebrate conservation organization in the world. Scott has a lifelong love for all things creeping and crawling, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Hey, Scott, it's good to see you and talk with you again.
Good to see you too, Rita.
I'm honored to have you here with us today. We finally got to do it. Just to give our viewers a little fact, just last year, you and a couple of other organizations appealed, which then overturned a court decision that prohibited the protection of 4 bumblebee species. Now, because of your efforts, these bees are protected under the California Endangered Species Act, and for the first time, insects are regarded as animals worth protecting. That's actually when you and I met, when I was writing an article about this for Outdoor California magazine. So you've also co-authored a couple of seminal books, Attracting Native Pollinators and Gardening for Butterflies, and more than 200 publications on invertebrate conservation. So the big question is, when a lot of people believe that most insects should be squashed, swatted, sprayed, and virtually annihilated because they've been demonized in books and movies, songs, and on camping trips, why are these tiny critters so important to you, and why should we care?
Well, they're so important to me for a variety of reasons, Rita. But what I like to say first is that these animals are vital to life on the planet. They're vital to humans. And without them, this world would be drastically changed. Rita, if you like to eat good food, you can thank a pollinator. 1/3 of the food we eat comes from pollination, mostly by an insect. And these are the most nutritious, tasty foods like berries and nuts and vegetables and things like that. We'd have, corn and rice and wheat, but, that doesn't, it feed us, but it wouldn't be great.
And
But beyond,
we'd probably be sick, right? If those are the
well,
only
yeah, it
foods.
wouldn't be very nutritious.
Mhm.
So they're vitally important to us, but they're really vitally important to the planet as a whole. These animals are the base of the food chain. They pollinate, they feed many other animals. Over 96% of songbirds need insects to feed their young. So if you like songbirds in your yard, you can thank an insect. If you fish
Mhm.
in any of our streams, lakes, or rivers, you can thank an insect because almost all of those fish feed on insects. If you like clean streams and clean fields, these animals clean up after us. They start to decompose our animal and human waste. The list goes on and on and on. A study that came out a couple, almost 2 decades ago now, but in today's dollars, that study found that insects, native insects, are worth about $80 billion a year to the US economy. So those are the reasons that everybody should like insects.
So how are they worth that much to the economy?
Well, they're worth that much to the economy through things like getting rid of cow poop and pollination and things like bird watching. We wouldn't have bird watching because we wouldn't have birds without insects.
And birders wouldn't buy
Fishing,
binoculars and cameras,
yeah,
and that's part of the
yeah,
economy.
and all the fishing equipment that you
Mhm,
buy.
mhm.
So the list goes on and on and on. But I wanted to say that that's the reason we all, I guess, should
Mhm.
like them. I like insects, Rita, and I have since I was tiny because they're so cool. And that's maybe not why most people will like them. They're important to us, but I think they also just should have a little more respect. They're interesting animals that were on this planet before us, and so yes, they're important for all these reasons, but I don't think they should have to be important for us to care about them.
So why did you get involved with them? How did you start your love of insects?
Well, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska,
So did I, by
and
the way.
oh, you did? Oh,
Yeah,
that's so cool.
yeah. Fireflies.
I'm the youngest of 9 kids, and we didn't have a lot of money to go out, on far-flung
I
vacations,
hear
and
you. Yep.
lived in, fine, always had enough to eat, things like that. But I had a little area about a block and a half from my house, of course,
Mm.
before cell phones and before parents even knew where you were most of the time. I would spend my days down there. I would leave at sometimes after breakfast and not come back until dinner, and I would turn over rocks and find ants. I'd look for lizards and snakes. So I'm not just stuck on insects, any animal out there, fireflies at night,
Yeah.
butterflies during the day. And these were really my introduction to nature. This area no longer exists, by the way. It's all houses now.
Oh, I know. Mhm.
But I had the opportunity to just spend my time mucking around, seeing these neat animals, watching a caterpillar eat a plant, or see as you turn over the rocks, the ants moving the babies out of the way because you've disturbed their nest. And they're just fascinating and wonderful. And that's how I fell in love with them.
Okay.
But
And
then
it stuck.
later on, I learned how important they really were. But at the time, my mom was just trying to keep up with me by going to Goodwill to buy aquaria so I could bring some of these insects home. And she was, uh, for a woman who had 9 kids, she was pretty open to also having insects and lizards and snakes out with in high school, went to college. And so I waited quite a while to go to college. I actually worked in oil rigs. I worked doing logging. I worked in construction, but really felt it wasn't satisfying to me. And I was interested in science. I was interested at that point. I started getting interested in conservation. I started to see that what we were doing to the world. And so, after doing that for 6 or 7 years after high school, which is what everybody else in my high school did, they just went off to work. I went back and got an associate's degree in horticulture, then a bachelor's degree in plant science, and then the master's degree in ecology. But my whole goal at that point was to use science to inform conservation. I always felt that we needed science communicators because there seemed to be this wall between the sciencey people and everybody else. And sometimes it was really important science that I just didn't think was being heard.
Yeah.
And so that's when I went back to school. That was really my goal: was how do I learn? How do I become a scientist? Not so necessarily I can do science, but so that I can use it to inform the betterment of the world.
Yeah, and to really bring that critical information in a format that, the average person can hear it and relate to it and feel something about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And really thinking about communications is so important for I would say, if we can work our way out of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, this communication is vital. And we need that bridge between that really important information that scientists are bringing to this debate and policymakers and agencies and farmers and even gardeners and everyday people. We need need that bridge to ensure that that information, and I never use the word dumb it down, because that's to me a
Absolutely.
pejorative, right?
Yeah.
People that are interested are often smart, maybe just not in the statistics that are in that paper or some of the terms. It's putting it in a format that people can that will engage them. And then the second step, which I think is vital, we can do outreach and education, but one thing Xerces tries to do is what's called technical assistance. We do outreach and education, we get people excited, but then we provide them with the tools and the knowledge to actually make change. How does a farmer who normally grows crops and manages their farm, how do they change their pesticide use and plant biodiverse habitat? That's something often that's just not what they've done in the past. So how can we help them do that and make sure they're successful? That's important.
So when you're talking about climate change and these crises of biodiversity, where do insects fall in importance of those things? How important are insects to changing that trajectory?
They're vital. So insects are vital, and here's a couple of reasons why. Um, Insects are the most diverse group of animals on the planet. There are 1 million described species of insects out there. There's about 40,000 described mammals out there.
Some we don't know, right? And many,
yeah, well, and then there's another 5 to 7. This is a very conservative estimate. Million insects that we haven't identified.
Whoa.
If you add crustaceans and mollusks, the snails and crayfish and the spiders and everything else, we're talking 1.5 million species. Because there's so many species, they pretty much fill every niche out there in environments, both invertebrates in oceans, coral reefs, and close to shore. You think of tide pools, and invertebrates in fields, whether that is the soil invertebrates that are helping break down the soil and make it better, the pollinators that are pollinating flowers, all the other insects in between. There's so many of them, they fill every niche, and there are so many individuals of them. What most people don't realize is that insects not only make up most of the species, but they're the heavyweights of the animal world. Often in many environments, if you added up the weight of insects, they weigh more than all the other animals put together. So you got a lot of them, you got them everywhere, and they're just driving the ecosystems. They're the food for other animals. They're pollinating, helping our soils, cleaning up after us, cleaning our streams. One animal I like to point out, because I think it brings it home, that people don't think about is grizzly bears, brown bears, are insect obligate animals. Their 2 main food sources are salmon and berries. Salmon would not reach the ocean without insects in the stream where they're born. These berries would not be available
as a food source, right?
As a food source. So insects, the salmon feed on the insects. They get the energy to make it out to the ocean and then back, and the bears eat them. And then these berries, of course, are pollinated by bees. So I think that brings it home. If you got an animal like a grizzly bear that relies on insects, you can kind of see that our world pretty much relies on them.
Yeah, I mean, gorillas too, right? And giraffes, they all rely on plants, and plants need to be pollinated. So when most people think that their landscapes have to be manicured and every leaf has to be removed from the soil becomes hard as a rock. What can we do to get people to understand that we need to leave the leaves, we need to plant native plants? How do we get them to kind of turn this aesthetic view around?
Yeah, well, first, I think people do need to understand that there's an issue. I don't shy away. We're the solution people at Xerces, but I also don't shy away from talking about these real deep systemic issues that we have. And insects are in decline. Every study, not every study, but the vast majority of studies out there on insect groups are showing that insects are declining in diversity. That means we're losing species, and they're declining in abundance. A paper that came out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that insects were generally, I'm going to back up because I like to get the science right, is that if you look at these studies overall, generally insects are declining at 1 to 2% a year, insect populations, the ones that are studied. If you add that up over time, that's a 25% decline over 30 years. That's huge. We're losing a quarter of the insects every 30 years, and that's less pollination. Why are they declining? Well, unfortunately, it's us. They don't, we tend to grow our food and build our houses in a way that destroys all habitat. And if we're not destroying habitat, the habitat next door often is degraded. It has too much grazing or too much mowing, invasive species, things like that. So that habitat issue. But number two, on top of that, is pesticide use. We use more pesticides on this planet than we've ever have. And pesticides kill animals. So herbicides kill plants, insecticides kill insects, the list goes on, and we use a lot of them. On top of that, we have many other issues. We move animals around, that spreads diseases. We have lights everywhere that harms our nighttime, nocturnal insects. And then we've got climate change.
And we've got leaf blowers. Let's not forget leaf blowers.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the loss and degradation of the habitat, right? We're changing that through, as you said, really manicuring all of these landscapes.
Sterilizing.
So, yes, yeah. So once you understand that, then we can talk to folks about the real easy ways that we can make change. If you're a gardener, it's pretty frustrating to me that we would remove all the native animals from the landscape so that we could have our manicured, pretty sterile bluegrass lawns and hybrid tea roses and all of that. We're leaving nothing for our neighbors, right? And our neighbors being the animals, whether these are insects or birds or, any other animals that might be moving through your yard. And there are simple ways to garden that both will make your yard more beautiful, make your yard more healthy. Of insects. I've worked on wolves, worked on, protecting large landscapes, worked on a lot of different issues. And not everybody can get in touch with actually protecting habitat for wolves. So you can give money to conservation groups, and you should. We should protect wolves. We should protect grizzly bears. We need to do that. But with insects, it doesn't matter whether you have a little piece of yard, you're a farmer, you're a land manager of a national park, or you don't even own any property. You can be part of this solution. And in your yard, it simply means thinking about what you plant. Plant some native plants. You don't have to go fully native, although some people do, and that's highly beneficial. But adding native plants into the yard and adding for pollinators plants that bloom throughout your season. In California, you've got a long season. So thinking about drought tolerant plants that will bloom in most parts of California throughout the season. In Ohio, that's a shorter season. But then number two, it's the pesticides, especially the insecticides. We have to move away from what is called cosmetic use of insecticides. In most yards, we're using these terrible chemicals that harm the insects, but also harm your pets, can harm your kids, can harm the streams and rivers that are near you, just so we got these manicured, perfect, what we think of as perfect lawns.
In the ocean, it all goes to the
It
ocean.
ends up eventually in the ocean. So those two things alone, simply thinking about native plants and adding native, especially flowering plants that insects like,
What would be
and
one in
stopping
California,
pesticide
Scott?
use.
Which plant, just to give people an idea of what might be a flowering, an all year long flowering native plant?
Yeah, so California lilac.
Lilac.
Well, there aren't many plants that flower all year long.
Right.
What you want is ones that flower in the spring, ones that flower in the summer, and ones that flower in the fall. And there are
Okay.
different ones. We've got lists for every region of the United States on our website. But one of my favorites is California lilac. It is an insect magnet. Insects just love it. It's hardy. It's drought tolerant. It's beautiful. And the cool thing, Rita, that I find anyway, is if you do this, they will come. I moved from a house 8 years ago to another house. And of course, when I moved in, every house I've moved in has been all bluegrass and non-native plants.
Right.
And not an insect, hardly a bird. And we ripped out a lot of the non-natives, planted natives, but also kept a few of the things we loved that even non-natives. My wife loves roses, and so we kept a few of those roses. We kept a small patch of bluegrass to have the trampoline on. But we planted a lot of resources for insects. We stopped using pesticides, and within 2 years, it was a mecca, a haven for insects, bees, butterflies, birds eating. We leave the seed heads and the birds all come and eat the seeds off the flowers. And so you're getting both a beautiful landscape that is, beautiful flowers, but you're getting these beautiful animals visiting these flowers. It's like flying flowers around the flowers. And so it's so magical, so cool. And it didn't take away from our enjoyment of the landscape. We still go out, we go out and jump on the trampoline or throw the ball around with
in that yard, bluebirds love, a lot of birds love a green lawn, bluebirds love it and phoebes love it. So they also like the expansive ones to some extent.
Yeah, but we don't need so much of it is the thing. That's not limiting. And so keeping, we live in human constructs, right? This is for better or worse.
Yes.
We're living in houses, but we can share them. That's kind of how I like to think about it. We can share them with these other animals.
This is kind of a big question. I mean, nature is our life support system. It gives us clean air, clean water, food to eat, but people are so disconnected from that fact. Why do you think they're so disconnected?
I think there are a whole host of reasons. I think it is in this day and age, electronics are a part of it. I mentioned
they don't get out.
They don't get out. I went out when I was a kid. What were you going to do? Watch daytime TV? It was all soap operas. So what else? I could have been playing baseball, I suppose. But that's still better than sitting and watching TV.
Yeah.
I also think that a large sector of society, we do have to remember, is not as fortunate, at least as me, in that they may be working paycheck to paycheck. Their whole life is thinking about how they manage, right? They may live in areas where they can't even go out and see nature, and there's not much nature around. And one of the things I think we need to do a better job of, and Xerces is really trying to lean in to do this, is bring nature and insects into communities that don't have much green space. In Santa Fe, for instance, we've done, it's called our Habitat Plant Program, where we're give out free habitat kits to people in the downtown, more downtown area of Santa Fe, the area that has fewer parks, fewer green spaces, and bringing nature into those landscapes, which both helps insects, helps birds, but also helps people understand and be part of this effort. And I think as conservationists, we really need to reach out broadly, and make it easy for people to be back in touch with nature.
So they're actually not connected because they're not touching it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's pretty easy.
I mean, if you're working every day and you don't have a park close, or a natural area close, are you going to go out of your way to visit it? Probably not. So bringing that nature to them. But I think it's many different ways. So with farmers, a lot of farmers are changing their practices. We need more. But one of the reasons they do it is because of economics. They see that down the road, if they don't take care of nature, they or their sons and daughters won't be able to farm. Other farmers, though, react to just putting nature back into these landscapes. We had a farmer who has put in more than 2 miles of hedgerows in his farm. He paid for the whole thing himself. And the reason he paid for it is because back in the 1970s, he was told, his dad was told actually, that habitat was bad. You should pull this habitat out. And now his son was able to put it back and said his dad would have loved that this habitat was back for the birds and all the other animals. He wasn't really thinking pollinators. He was thinking bigger because they look at the hawks and eagles and things. So many messages for different people. And that's where one size doesn't fit all.
But well, we're all different, I guess. And
yeah,
we gotta all get there some way.
That's right.
So I wanted to ask you, how has all of this changed you? Taking Xerces from 4 people now to hundreds of employees and really bringing this message to people. How has it changed you?
Yeah, so we're getting close to 100. So I want to clarify that. We're not over 100 yet.
Okay.
And we have thousands of volunteers. It's changed me in that, both in the good and the bad. One, I will just say that running an organization with 4 people is a lot easier than running an organization of 100. So I have less hair because of that. But what gets me up every day is to see the people that we are working with making change on a farm, in a natural area, in a garden, policymakers that are promoting good policies that address the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. That's what gets me up every day, because we have a lot of people out there that want to help, and they're looking for help. They're looking for assistance in how they can be the best conservationists they can. And that's what Xerces tries to provide. So it does get me up every day. It energizes me. It excites me.
You're making a difference.
Right? That's certainly a big difference. Trying to. Yeah.
So the other question I had, maybe we can wrap it up with this one, I guess. Native seems to be important. I mean, we have a lot of European honeybees out there who seem to be doing the job. So why are native insects so crucial?
Yeah, native insects are crucial. So honeybees, just if I have a second, I do want to point out so that your listeners know, honeybees are not native to North America. We brought honeybees here. They've been here for hundreds of years. Honeybees are really not important for pollination of anything but food crops. And they can actually be detrimental to the native bees. They can, the disease spread, they actually compete with the natives. So if we want native ecosystems, And if we want an environment that functions with our native birds and our native animals, we need native insects. Native insects and plants go together. I like to say that native plants and native insects are really the fabric of the planet, and we're ripping that fabric apart. Non-natives will not stitch it back together. We have to have native plants, native insects. Now, as I mentioned, in certain places like your yard, 3/4 natives is great. You can have your little patches of non-natives and stuff. It's a human construct, but we should focus on natives. And diversity is key, Rita, because diversity leads to resilience. And under climate scenarios, we're losing species. So we want to protect as many species as possible, because some will do okay under climate, our raised temperatures and our climate destabilization. Some won't. So it's an insurance policy for our ecosystem. So
areas that have, more acreage, more natives, more wildlands, but it gives the insects and the birds and the pollinators a connection to these bigger areas. Would you say that's how we're going to patch it together?
That is how we're going to patch it together. We just published a paper that showed that if we address pesticide use and we put habitat along field borders throughout California, that we can connect across the Central Valley, one of the most highly industrial ag areas of the world. But we can do it. And that's 1 million acres of habitat just on its own. It connects across the valley. And hedgerows and other habitat on farms, a different study showed that if we could get this type of habitat on 50 to 80% of California farms, that's 12% of the climate capture that California needs to meet its carbon targets. Because the one thing I haven't pointed out is most of these native plants actually capture carbon in the ground as well. So they're both helping with climate change and with biodiversity. We can do both.
And another good reason to leave the leaves, because they're capturing the carbon, putting it back into the soil, so the plants can, give us oxygen to breathe.
Yes. Yeah, they're building those soils. It's so important.
Well, thank you, Scott. This is such an important conversation. I hope we can keep it going. I hope people get a lot out of this. And as I said, if you like what you heard today here, please click the subscribe button and we will have more. It's been great talking with you, Scott. I really appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you, Rita. I love to be here. Happy to come back.
All right. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.